Hello there, everybody. Yes, I do apologise, but it is time for another dose of Jacob Rees-Mogg. This time he will be going one-on-one with Femi Nylander on the subject of British imperialism. Now, look, it's one thing to believe we in the present day should bear no responsibility for the conduct of our ancestors. That's something I'm willing to debate. But it's another thing entirely to start reeling off a list of things nations Britain colonised should be grateful for. Well, that's exactly what Rees-Mogg attempts to do here, and it's a truly vile display, as one would expect. Let's take a look.
Well, ahead of the King's coronation, outside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere's building up, the crowds are building up. There's a real positive atmosphere here. Just walking in, so many people are excited, and the people who've been sleeping out here for several nights to catch a glimpse of golden carriages and all the pomp and circumstance of a coronation. But unfortunately, some agitators, only 12 of them, from the Commonwealth nations, have written to the King demanding an apology for genocide and colonisation. Now, it is worth remembering that the King bears no responsibility for the British Empire in any realistic sense. Not only was he not alive for the bulk of the British Empire, certainly not for its expansion, but it's an even longer time ago that the British monarchs had any executive control and were directing how the empire operated. But we should be proud of our empire for what it gave the world, for what it still gives to the world, not in ruling places, but in what we have left behind, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of constitutions based on democracy, on the rights of property. If you look at the current race between India and China, which is going to be the greatest nation, I'm confident that India will win. And why is that? It's because India has democracy and the rule of law. Things that were left by the British were brought in by the British when we were there and then stayed when we left and have been grown and improved by India once we left.
What does he mean by which will be the greatest nation? By what metric? Just in his mind, which he prefers. Ugh.
But we did more than that. We brought in proper justice so that Sleeman got rid of thuggee. Thuggee in India was a practice where travellers were murdered. And it went on, it was a widespread practice, wiped out by the British when we were there. Why? Because actually we were a law-abiding society, and we have taken the common law around the world. If you look at the United States, of course, another common law country with free markets and free enterprise, where does that come from? Where does the US Constitution come from? It comes out of the British Constitution. It was a conscious effort to perfect the British Constitution. Even the contentious right to bear arms is drawn directly from the British Bill of Rights, or strictly the English Bill of Rights, slightly different from the Scottish one. The English Bill of Rights maintains the right to bear arms for the maintenance of a Protestant militia. And when the Americans were writing their constitution, they took that too. We even brought railways across the world, but again, particularly in India.
Jacob Rees-Mogg hates railways. I know this for a fact. He's sick of railways. He said it many times. He doesn't understand why the Conservative Party obsess over railways. Because he doesn't like them. But apparently it's a benefit that we took railways elsewhere.
And the empire was the greatest force for ending slavery, something that is much forgotten. No other empire in the whole of history ever tried to get rid of slavery. It was the British Empire that did it, the British Empire that succeeded in doing it, and that was an extremely novel thing to do. The whole of history before that had accepted slavery as something that would take place. And if you look at what was going on in the Ottoman Empire, in the same point as we were abolishing slavery, slavery was flourishing. Why, as we were talking about last week, was Gordon in Khartoum? Gordon was in Khartoum to stop slavery, and this was the British Empire. I think it's something we should be proud of, the King should be proud of, and we certainly shouldn't apologise for our great, our noble, our illustrious history. But of course, I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm now delighted to be joined by the filmmaker and activist, Femi Nylander. Femi, thank you for joining me again. You're not necessarily of the same view as me on this.
No, I mean, I think some of today's monologue was quite, I have to say, frankly, a bit silly to say that Britain, by colonizing the world and going out and saying, we now own this land, we now own your people, you have to work for us, your lands belong to us, your labor belongs to us, instilling racial hierarchies was doing these countries a favor. And I also think it's disingenuous to say that I started something, I was the world leader in it, something terrible, the slave trade, and because I ended it, that's a good thing. Also, Britain wasn't the first country where slavery...
But it's simply not true to say that we were the world leader in it. That slavery long predates the British Empire. Femi, you know this. Slavery long predates the British Empire. Slavery was going for thousands of years before the British Empire. The creation of it had nothing to do with the British Empire. And the slave trade involved other nations selling the slaves to the British when they were traded, and they were selling their own people.
Well, actually, if you look at Britain, and this links back to what you were saying the other day about Britain helping to end the slave trade in other places, Britain often did trading for other countries. The same thing you're accusing African countries of doing. Queen Anne was involved in the Asiento de Negros, where basically she ran the slave trade on behalf of Spain. She ran the slave trade on behalf of Spain because Spain wasn't involved in trading, and basically had a monopoly on transporting slaves from Africa to South America for various Spanish colonies. So Britain was involved in that. However, when we look at colonialism, which came after slavery, colonialism is full of evils. You look at the Bengal famines in India, where millions and millions of people died because grain was being exported from India to feed British soldiers in the middle of a famine. You look at the Mau Mau camps in Kenya, which was covered up by the British government and which has now come out again. Torture
you've
camps.
You've also got to look at the British bringing fresh water into countries that they were ruling, bringing the railways, bringing a legal system. And I think the mistake you make is that you assume before the British got there was some elaborate, well-established democracy running these countries.
No. Whatever went on before the British arrived is none of our business. Whether people were harming each other is none of our business. Just because somewhere isn't a democracy, it doesn't mean we can just go ahead and invade them.
There wasn't. If you look at what Napier was doing in Sindh, Napier was overthrowing a totalitarian tyranny that was killing people, and that he was trying to stop that. So I think you're assuming there was a much better prior state than in reality there was.
Well, firstly, the railways that were built, if you actually look at the railways that were built under the colonial time, they usually go from places where there are lots of resources directly to the coast, because the purpose of these railways wasn't to help the citizens of whatever country they happened to be built in. They were to help transport raw goods, oil, gold,
but that brings wealth to the nations,
out of those countries to be shipped abroad,
and that boosts people's standard of living.
Yes, let's steal everyone's resources, and that brings them wealth, and that brings them a better standard of living. When we're exporting everything, when we're stealing everything to use back in the United Kingdom.
That's terrific.
So these railways is a complete misnomer to say that Britain helped people by building railways out of some beneficence or some goodness. Also, a lot of these countries did have complex...
It's not because it helped... Hold on just a moment. Because it helped bring people out of poverty, and that it helped raise the standard of living, that railways boosted economic activity. And that was one of the great successes of the British Empire, was raising that base level of economic activity.
They boosted theft. They didn't boost economic activity. Even till today, the resources of African countries, which are heavily traded on the London Stock Exchange, do not benefit African people. You have huge amounts of tax evasion on various... I'd invite you to read a report by a company called War on Want, which talks about how...
I think you should look at the economy of Botswana. Botswana has the enormous diamond mines, which has made Botswana a very rich country.
And people in the West.
We're going to have to draw stumps there, I'm afraid, but I think you should study Botswana before we talk again. Thank you so much, Femi.
Ugh. What a patronising git. It's really strange and typically stupid of Rees-Mogg, by the way, to cite Botswana as a success story of British colonisation. Yes, Botswana is home to the richest diamond mine in the world, but this mine didn't commence operations until some 16 years following the gaining of their independence from Britain. Indeed, the only reason Botswana has a thriving diamond industry is because the British had absolutely no idea to the extent of the volume of diamonds in Botswana prior to leaving in 1966. Yes, Britain didn't thieve them because they had no idea they were there. So if that's the best example Jacob Rees-Mogg has, dearie me. Anyway, as previously mentioned, sensible people can happily debate reparations, but for somebody like Jacob Rees-Mogg, this is an impossibility, because his version of history has been whitewashed to such an extraordinary extent, there is absolutely no point in bringing him into the debate. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I am not prepared to sit through this rubbish all over again, so I could well be wrong. But did he even admit to any wrongdoing by imperialist Britain? All I seem to recall him saying is something along the lines of, yes, we engaged in slavery, but we weren't the first to do so. Or some rubbish like that. Anyway, as per usual, it wasn't going well for Jacob. So he resorted to the standard tactics of talking over his guest and cutting him off at every opportunity. A completely skewed, ridiculous version of history, and a completely embarrassing and pointless waste of time. Well, that'll do it anyway. Just another example for you there of how an extreme English nationalist like Mogg is happy to fill the heads of his viewers with this completely made-up version of historical events. The saddest part is, they do trust him, and they do believe him. Thankfully, they are in the minority. Cheers for watching. Take care. Bye bye.